The angle grinder screamed and threw sparks off the rusted hull, and the old man had to steady himself with his prosthetic leg because the deck was slick with mildew. He'd been cutting for 20 minutes. His arms were shaking. He was too old for this. But the steel plate under his hands didn't belong to this boat, and he had to know why. Sweat dripped off his beard onto the metal, hissing. The last weld gave. He pried the plate back with a screwdriver, and cold air came out of the dark, the air of a space sealed for years. He got the flashlight in his teeth. He looked down, and for a long moment the old man on that dying houseboat could not breathe. His name was Ray Coleman. He'd bought this wreck at auction for $12. What was in that hull changed everything. Stay with me. Let me tell you who Ray Coleman was before that afternoon. Ray was 67 years old, and he'd been alone a long time. He lived in a single-wide trailer on the edge of a little river town in the middle of the country, the kind of town where the paper mill closed 20 years ago and nobody had figured out what to do since. His trailer sat on a lot he half-owned, next to a scrub yard, and it was the last address he ever expected to have. Here's the shape of Ray's life. He'd gone to Vietnam at 19, and come home at 21 with one leg and a lot of things he didn't talk about. He'd worked construction for 30 years, hard work on a bad leg, until his back quit on him too. He'd had a wife once. 2 kids. The wife had left him in the 80s, and the kids had grown up out west and didn't call. He'd made peace with all of that the way men of his generation made peace with things, which is to say he'd stopped mentioning them, and then he'd stopped thinking about them. And now most days he just sat on his porch and watched the river slide by at the bottom of his yard. The disability check came on the 1st of the month. It paid for the trailer and the propane and the beans and rice and coffee. There was never anything left over, and that was fine with Ray. He'd stopped wanting things to be left over. Better to want what you had. But here's the thing you have to understand about Ray Coleman. He wasn't bitter. That's the piece most people missed. A man in his situation, another man might have gone hard, gone mean. Ray hadn't. He was a quiet man, but he was a kind one. He fed a stray cat that came to his porch. He helped the woman across the road carry her groceries when she couldn't manage the steps. He waved at every truck that went past his gate. He'd learned a long time ago that the world doesn't owe you softness, but you can still be soft anyway, and it costs you nothing, and it might mean something to somebody. That was Ray Coleman, invisible to the town, kind to everything in front of him. Then one morning he saw a notice pinned to the bulletin board outside the little post office in town. County auction. Abandoned boats. Riverside impound yard. Bidder must remove within 7 days. Ray stood there and read it twice. He didn't know why. He'd never owned a boat. He didn't need a boat. He couldn't even use one with his leg. But there was something about the words abandoned boats that caught him. Because Ray Coleman knew a little about being an abandoned thing on a river. He went home. He forgot about it for 2 days. Then on the morning of the auction, he woke up and made his coffee, and sat on the porch, and thought about it. He had $118 in a coffee can under his sink. It was the whole of his savings in this world. He was not going to spend it. That would have been foolish. But something in him wouldn't let it go. It was a bright fall morning. He hadn't been anywhere in weeks. A man can drive out to look at a thing without spending $1 on it. So Ray Coleman got in his old truck and drove 20 miles out to the county impound yard by the river. And he stood at the back of a little crowd of 40 or 50 people, while a man in a folding chair auctioned off a row of dead boats. Most boats went for hundreds. Some went for thousands. But at the very end, the auctioneer waved at something at the far end of the lot and said, "All right folks, last item. And it's a project." The crowd chuckled. The last item was a houseboat. What used to be a houseboat? A big flat-bottomed thing, maybe 38 feet long, sitting up on rotten wooden blocks in the weeds at the edge of the lot. The paint had come off. The roof was collapsed on one end. The windows were smashed. It looked like it had been dragged out of the river 10 years ago and left to die. Nobody bid on it. The auctioneer looked around. "Come on, folks," he said. "Somebody's got to take her. Any offer?" Silence. "I'll go once, twice, sold to nobody, boys, and the county's got to spend $6,000 to haul this thing to the dump. Come on. $12. Somebody give me $12 and she's yours." There was a general laugh, and men started turning to leave, because it was over. Ray Coleman heard himself say, $12. The auctioneer squinted through the crowd. "Who said that?" Ray raised a hand. The auctioneer laughed. "Old-timer, you serious?" "Yes, sir," Ray said. The auctioneer shrugged and banged his little gavel. "Sold," he said, for $12 to the man in back. And he stood up, and the crowd broke up, and Ray Coleman shuffled forward through the weeds toward a boat he had absolutely no business owning. He didn't know why he'd bid. He couldn't have told you. Something in him had just spoken up. A man who lived on a river maybe ought to have a boat, even a dead one. Or maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe he'd just seen a thing everybody else was going to throw away, and he'd known what that felt like, and he hadn't been able to help himself. He paid his $12. He signed a piece of paper. And he stood there in the weeds of the impound yard, one hand on the rotting hull of his new boat, and he wondered what in God's name he was going to do with a 38-foot houseboat he had 7 days to remove. He had no idea what was sealed inside her. Ray came back the next morning with a friend from town. Well, calling him a friend was generous. Dwight was a mechanic who worked on Ray's old truck sometimes and drank coffee with him at the diner once in a while. But Dwight had a flatbed trailer and a big pickup, and Dwight owed Ray a favor for the time Ray had helped him mend a fence, and Dwight was willing to come out and help move the boat. They stood in the weeds looking at it. Dwight said, "Ray, brother, this ain't a boat. This is firewood." "I know it," Ray said. "You paid $12 for this." "I did." Dwight shook his head. "Where you even gonna put it?" Ray said he'd been thinking about that all night. He owned a strip of riverbank at the back of his lot. It wasn't much, but it was flat, and it was his, and if they could get the boat down there, at least he wouldn't have to worry about somebody making him move it. Dwight didn't argue. He was a man who helped when help was asked. So the two of them spent all that day and half the next, working with a winch and blocks and a truck and a whole lot of swearing, getting that rotting boat off the impound yard and down 20 miles of country road to the little strip of riverbank behind Ray's trailer. Dwight did most of it, because Ray's leg wouldn't let him do a lot of what needed doing. But Ray did what he could, and by sundown on the second day, that broken houseboat sat listing in the weeds behind Ray Coleman's trailer, its bow half in the river and its stern up on the bank, like a beached whale nobody had bothered to bury. Dwight looked at it and shook his head one more time. "Ray," he said, "you're a strange old man." "I know it," Ray said. He gave Dwight $40 for his trouble, which was almost half of what he had left in the coffee can. Dwight tried to give it back. Ray insisted. That's how Ray was. And Dwight drove off, and Ray Coleman was alone on his little strip of riverbank with the biggest, ugliest, deadest thing he'd ever owned. The next day he started poking around inside her. Not to fix her up. He wasn't fool enough to think he was going to fix her up. But he'd bought her, and she was his, and he wanted to see what was in her. He'd found in his life that when you own a thing, even a broken thing, you ought to know what's in it. So Ray Coleman spent the next week climbing around inside a rotting houseboat with a flashlight and a screwdriver, sorting through what was left. There wasn't much. Rotted bedding, rusted pots in the little galley, some old fishing tackle, a cracked mirror, a calendar from 12 years back, still on August, water-stained and peeling. Whoever had lived on this boat had left in a hurry, or hadn't left at all, and the county had come and dragged the whole thing off and let it sit and rot for a decade. Ray took his time. He liked being in there. There was something peaceful about that broken little floating house. Something familiar. A place another man had lived and left and been forgotten. He understood that space. On the fourth day he found something odd. Down in the belly of the boat, in what would have been the engine compartment, the deck plate was welded shut. It was old work. The welds had rusted over years ago. And they weren't factory welds. They were the marks of a man with a home shop who'd sealed something into the hull and covered his work up with old floorboards. Ray sat on his knees on the deck plate and thought about it a long time. You don't weld a compartment shut for no reason. You do it to hide something. And you don't hide something on a boat you're going to sell. You hide something on a boat you don't want anyone else to know is there. The last man to live on this boat had sealed something into her. Ray Coleman was 67 years old, and he had learned in a long life that most mysteries are not worth chasing. But this one sat on his own boat, on his own riverbank, and it was his now. He'd paid $12 for the right to know what was in her. He drove into town the next morning, and he bought an angle grinder from the hardware store with the last of the coffee can money. He bought a mask. He came home. He sat on his porch and looked at the boat for a while, thinking about whether he really wanted to open a can that had been sealed for a decade or more. He decided he did. That afternoon he went down to the boat with the grinder and a flashlight and a screwdriver, and he lowered himself down into the engine compartment, and he braced his prosthetic leg against a rib of the hull, and he started to cut. And that's the afternoon this story really begins. Ray Coleman, alone in a broken boat on a river nobody used anymore, cutting open a compartment a stranger had sealed shut a long time ago. He didn't know what he was going to find. He'd made himself a promise he wouldn't guess. Whatever was in there had been put there for a reason, and it wasn't his business to have expectations. It was his business only to look. He couldn't have known that what was inside that hull was going to change everything. Not just for him. For a lot of people. The grinder cut through. The plate came up. Ray shone the flashlight down. Inside was a metal box the size of a large toolbox. It sat by itself on the ribs of the hull, dry as a bone, the sealed compartment having done its job for a decade. Ray reached down, working slow because of his back, and he lifted the box out. It was heavier than he expected. He carried it up to the deck. He sat down cross-legged in the fading light, and he opened it. Inside was money. Not a fortune, not the kind of money you see in movies. but more money than Ray Coleman had ever held in his life. Bundles of $100 bills, banded, most of them older bills the way people used to keep cash. He counted slow, methodical, and when he was done he had counted $87,000. Ray Coleman sat on the deck of that broken boat with $87,000 in his lap, and he did not move for a long time. There was something else in the box, though. Under the money, a stack of papers tied with string. Ray untied them. The papers were personal. Old envelopes. A birth certificate. A social security card. A driver's license, cracked with age. And a letter, handwritten, folded in thirds. The name on all the papers was Elena Alvarez, and she'd been 54 years old at the time of the license, and she'd lived in a town about 40 miles downriver. Ray unfolded the letter with hands that shook a little now. The letter was addressed to Elena's granddaughter, a little girl named Sophia. It was dated 12 years back, and it explained everything Ray Coleman didn't want to know. Elena had been married to Frank Alvarez. Frank had been in trouble with some bad people in the town downriver. He'd taken the money, all their savings and a payout from an insurance settlement after their daughter died, and he'd sealed it into the hull of his houseboat because he was afraid the bad people would come looking for it. He'd told Elena where it was, then disappeared. The letter said Elena had waited a year and heard nothing, and she'd finally gone to look for the money herself. But by the time she'd found the impound yard, the county had already dragged the boat off. She'd written the letter to Sophia because she was dying, and she wanted her granddaughter to know where the money was in case somebody luckier than Elena ever found it. Sophia is your family, Elena had written at the end. If you are reading this and you found the money, please. I have no one else. My little Sophia is with the state, since I could not care for her. She has nothing. If you have found this money, please make sure it goes to my Sophia. I would ask you as one person to another. That is all I can do from where I am now. Ray Coleman read that letter 3 times. Then he sat on the deck of his broken houseboat in the fading light with $87,000 and a dead woman's letter in his lap, and he thought about it for a very long time. Now here's the thing. Nobody knew. Nobody in the world knew what he'd found. He could have kept it. Every dollar. $87,000 would have changed the rest of his life. It would have bought him a real house, paid off his lot, given him savings for the first time since he was 20. He could have gone west and seen his kids. He could have done anything a man his age dreams of doing. And it was his. Legally. He'd bought the boat at a public county auction. Anything in the hull was his property. There would be no crime. Nothing wrong. Ray Coleman sat with that for the better part of an hour. He watched the river run at the bottom of his yard. He thought about his own kids, and about being forgotten, and about what it feels like to be a child the world has stopped looking at. He thought about his long stretch of years of asking nothing and getting nothing, and how bitter he had been tempted to become and had not become. And he understood something about himself that afternoon he hadn't known before. All his life, what had kept him soft was one simple thing. He'd never done a hard thing to somebody who couldn't fight back. There was a little girl named Sophia somewhere out there. And her grandmother, dying, had asked him, though she'd never known his name. She had asked him. Ray Coleman closed the box. He carried it up to his trailer. He put it under his bed. And the next morning he got in his truck and drove downriver to find a little girl named Sophia Alvarez. If you're still with me this far, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Stories like Ray's only reach people because folks like you stay till the end. It means more than you know. Because Ray Coleman was about to walk into a fight he wasn't ready for. It took him a week to find her. Sophia Alvarez was 15 years old now, a ward of the state, and she'd been moved through 5 foster homes since her grandmother died. The last one she'd run from. When Ray finally tracked her down, she was living in a group home outside a town called Millard, 40 miles downriver, and the woman who ran the home barely wanted to talk to him. Ray tried to explain. He wasn't family. He wasn't a social worker. He was just an old man who'd found something that had belonged to Sophia's grandmother, and he wanted to make sure it got to Sophia. The woman looked at him like he was crazy and closed the door. The next morning he tried again. This time he brought the letter with him, and he asked the woman at the home to just read it. She did, reluctantly. And when she was done, her whole face changed. She let Ray in. She sat him down at a kitchen table. And she told him some things about Sophia that a state caseworker probably shouldn't have told a stranger, but she was tired and old, and she told him anyway. Sophia was a smart kid, the woman said. Too smart for her situation. She'd been through hell in some of those foster homes. In the last one, she'd been in a bad house with a bad man in it, and she'd run because she was afraid of him. Now she was in this group home, on a list to age out at 18 with nothing, no family, no money, no plan. Nobody had fought for her in years. Ray asked if he could meet her. Just once. The woman said she'd try. 2 days later, Ray Coleman sat across from a 15-year-old girl in the kitchen of a group home outside Millard. She was thin and wary, and she wouldn't look at him. He didn't blame her. He'd learned a long time ago how to sit still with somebody who didn't want to talk. So he just sat. And after a while she looked up. He told her his name. He told her he'd bought a boat at auction. He told her whose boat it had been. And then he took out her grandmother's letter, slid it across the table, and said, "This belonged to you. Your grandma wrote it a long time ago. She wanted you to have it." Sophia read the letter. She read it twice. And when she was done, her face was wet, and she looked up at Ray Coleman, and she said the first thing she'd said all afternoon. "Is there really money?" "There is," Ray said. "Every dollar of it. It's yours." And Sophia Alvarez, 15 years old and forgotten by the whole world, put her head down on the kitchen table and cried like a child, because a stranger had driven 40 miles to bring her the only piece of her grandmother she had left, and told her the truth on top of it. Except a man in Millard heard about the money. His name was Dean Marston. He owned half the block the group home sat on, and he had some kind of side arrangement with the woman who ran the place, and he heard from her about the strange old man who'd shown up with $87,000 for a foster kid nobody wanted. Marston looked into it. He figured out that Sophia Alvarez was the granddaughter of Elena, and Elena had been married to Frank, and Frank had crossed some people 12 years back that Dean Marston had done business with. The money in that box, Marston decided, was really his. Sort of. In a way. Enough of a way that a man with lawyers and connections could tangle it up in court for years, until an old veteran with no money quit fighting and a 15-year-old girl gave up hope. And that's when Ray Coleman, who had come home to his porch to be done with it, got the letter from Marston's lawyer. Ray read the letter twice on his porch, and then he set it down on the little table next to his coffee, and he watched the river run for a long time. Now most men in Ray Coleman's shoes would have walked away right there. He was old, he was tired, he was broke. He had done what he'd set out to do. He'd found the girl. He'd given her the money. If some rich man downriver wanted to fight for it, that was between the rich man and the state, and Ray had no business getting in the middle of it. Except Ray Coleman knew, sitting on that porch, that if he walked away, Sophia would lose. That was the whole math of the thing. Dean Marston had lawyers. Sophia had a state case worker who saw her twice a year. A rich man against a foster kid is not a fair fight, and Ray had spent a lifetime watching unfair fights and looking away, and he did not want to look away one more time in the little life he had left. So Ray Coleman did what he'd never done before in his life. He asked for help. He drove to the little veterans post in the county seat, one he'd walked past 100 times without going in. He sat down with the man behind the desk, a fellow named Cal, and he told Cal the whole story straight through. The boat. The box. Elena. Sophia. Marston. And Ray said plain, "I don't know what to do. But I've got to do something. Can you help me?" Cal listened. When Ray was done, Cal picked up the phone. 2 hours later, 3 more veterans were sitting in that little room, and Cal had called a lawyer he knew in the city, a woman named Rebecca, who owed the post a favor. Rebecca drove out that weekend. She read the letter. She looked at the case. And she told Ray Coleman something that made him sit down hard. "Ray," she said, "this letter is airtight. Elena's request is documented. She signed and dated it. The money was hidden by her husband before his disappearance. There is no legitimate claim from any Marston in the world. This is not a hard case. What Marston is doing is called intimidation, and I have spent my career eating men like him for breakfast. If you and the Veterans Post are willing to stand up for this girl, I will do the whole thing for free, and I will burn Dean Marston's lawyers down to the studs." Ray stared at her. He said, "I don't have any money." "I know," Rebecca said. "That's the point." And it happened. Slow at first, then fast. Rebecca filed to formalize the trust for Sophia. Marston's lawyers came in hot. Rebecca cut them off at the knees. The Veterans Post backed Ray publicly, and when a local reporter got wind of the story, that an old disabled vet had bought a rotting boat for $12 and driven 40 miles to give a foster kid her inheritance, the story spread everywhere. The town that had walked past Ray Coleman for years suddenly knew his name. And Dean Marston, who did business by staying quiet, could not survive being loud. His arrangements with the group home came out. The woman running it lost her license. Marston faced a bigger investigation than he'd expected, and by year's end he was in his own kind of trouble, none of which touched Sophia's money. The trust closed. Every dollar of the $87,000 went into Sophia's name, untouchable by anyone until she was 18. With interest by the time she got there, it was over $100,000. But that's not the end of the story, because Sophia was still in a group home. She was still 15. She was still alone in the world. And Ray Coleman, who had planned to drive home and forget the whole thing, found he could not. He'd started something in Sophia's life he could not unstart. He'd been the first adult in years to look her in the eye and tell her the truth and mean it. She'd started calling him. Not often. Then the letters came. Little notes at first. Then longer ones. Then one day a question. "Mr. Coleman, could I come stay with you for a weekend?" Ray held that letter on his porch. And he understood that he was being asked a question much bigger than a weekend. He said yes. Of course he said yes. And Sophia came, that first weekend, on a bus, and Ray met her at the little station and brought her back to his trailer and gave her the couch and made her coffee in the morning, and they sat on the porch and watched the river run, and Sophia said, "This is the first quiet place I've been in years." She came back the next weekend. And the one after. And on the fourth visit, Sophia asked Ray, careful, in the quiet way a foster kid learns to ask for things, if there was any chance she could stay for good. Ray Coleman was 67 years old, and he had one leg and a small check, and a broken houseboat rotting on his riverbank, and he could not have said with any straight face that he was fit to raise a 15-year-old girl. But he'd done a lot of hard things in his life. Saying yes was not going to be one of them. He said yes. The Veterans Post helped him, and Rebecca helped him, and the state fought him a little but not much, because a caseworker in Millard had been keeping her own notes about Sophia's situation and had been praying anybody would come along. Here he was. Sophia Alvarez moved into Ray Coleman's trailer on a Tuesday in April. She was 15 years old and she had $100,000 in trust and a place with her feet on the floor, and, for the first time she could remember, an adult who had looked at her and said, "You matter to me," and had meant it. Ray never touched a dollar of Sophia's money. Not one. That was between him and himself. He hadn't done any of this for money, and he wasn't going to start now. Sophia finished high school in the little river town. She went to a good state college on her own money, and she came home summers to Ray's trailer. When she graduated, she went into social work. She spent the rest of her career finding kids like she had been and getting them out. Ray Coleman lived 7 more years. Good years. The best years of his life, he told her once on a slow afternoon on the porch, and he meant it. When he went in his sleep in that trailer, with Sophia sitting up in the chair beside him because she'd driven home when she heard he was fading. She held his hand through the last of it, and when he was gone, she cried for a long time. She still owns the little strip of riverbank. The trailer's gone. So is the houseboat, hauled off finally years back. But there's a bench down by the river now, where the boat used to sit. And Sophia goes there sometimes when she comes back to visit. She sits on it. She watches the water run. And she thinks about a stranger who paid $12 for a broken boat because he saw a thing everybody else was going to throw away and could not help himself. You always think a $12 boat can't save anything. Sometimes it saves everything. Sometimes the thing sealed inside a wreck nobody wanted is the thing that finds its way, through the last kind man on a dying river, to the person who needed it most. That's not luck. That's what happens when a man refuses to walk past a broken thing. Ray Coleman refused to walk past a broken boat, once. And a broken girl. And a whole life came out of it for both of them.